Hi, welcome back to another episode. Today, we're going to talk about a thing that a lot of people deal with. And I have to I have to say, this is not going to be an easy episode because this is something that a lot of people deal with, and this is not something that gets fixed overnight. And you may find that if you have one of the worst case scenarios, most likely you're gonna need help. So I'm gonna leave the disclaimer right here of I am not a medical professional. This is my personal experience. And if you are feeling any of this and it's way too uncontrollable where none of my advice could help you, please seek medical help. So, after we did that disclaimer, we are talking about overthinking. And we're not talking about the overthinking that is, you know, something happens and you're just thinking too much, or you're dealing with the whole situation of, oh my god, what if I do this, what if I do that, and the typical study thing where like you're overthinking if the test was good or not. We're not talking the lighthearted thing that goes away in a couple minutes. We are talking about the rumination. We're talking about the intrusive thoughts. We are talking about those moments where you just seem to be in a constant loop of overthinking. Not only am I going to explain what overthinking really is, what is specifically rumination, which is normally where you have that constant cycle, but also things that have helped me and things that you can try to implement to not only try to prevent it from starting, but also to get out of it as soon as possible if it does. And I'm going to give you my personal experience. So if you find that this does not work for you and you need medical help, go ahead and get it. So, first, I have a very big tendency of overthinking, but specifically rumination, which is when something happens and I start thinking about it and I start wondering about it and I start going down this rabbit hole of thinking so hard about it that I can't let it go. We're talking about over analyzing. We're talking negative thoughts. We're talking about comparison. We're talking about all kinds of negative ways of seeing it. We have the whole comparison thing, which is being like, oh, what if that went worse than that group, or that went better than that person? And you start comparing everything. We're talking about rumination, which is the constant thought of the same thought. So you're thinking the same thing constantly over and over and over again. We're talking about negative thoughts, which is when your thoughts get really negative and you start thinking, "Oh my god, I flunked on that test. Oh my god. Okay, I'm X, Y, or Z," and you give negative words, And I'm not gonna say them out loud so that I don't trigger anyone, but we're talking about negative way of thinking. We're talking about degradation. So we're talking about, when I mean degradation, we're talking about looking at yourself in the mirror or thinking about yourself or something that you did or something that happened or something that is about to happen, because it could also be associated with anxiety, which is the fear of something that hasn't happened yet. And you may start to ruminate or have negative thoughts and overthinking about something that hasn't even happened yet. So it's associated also with anxiety. And one thing that you need to understand, and a lot of people confuse these two, is that there's a difference about rumination and problem solving. Problem solving is when you're like, okay, so I have X, Y, or Z issue, and you start to think about all the options that you have, and then you finish that moment by coming into a decision or coming into a solution, right? So that is problem solving. That's when you have a problem, you think about it, you think of your options, and this could either take a couple minutes or it could take a couple days depending on the problem. Rumination is the same thought over and over again, but it turns negative. There's not a solution, there's not a reason, there's not a definitive answer. Or you may have come to a definitive answer, but then that answer gets repeated because that answer is not a positive answer, it's a negative answer. So you're constantly thinking that you're either not good enough or you're not trying hard enough. And then you repeat that over and over and over and over again. And another thing that I want to make sure that people understand is that rumination is the repeating of the same thought over and over again, which then can go into the negative self talk or the anxiety or the depression or all kinds of other things. But it always starts with a rumination. It always starts with something that pops up into your head. You can't stop thinking about it. And then it always goes into a negative spot. It's not the problem solving. It's not, I have a problem and then I think about the options and then I come up with the solution. It's not that. And that is a clear difference. Problem solving will end in a resolution. Rumination will not end in any sort of place, and it will lead to some sort of negative place. Another thing that I want you to understand is that there's ways of coping with it and ways that you may find that don't work for you because everyone is different. One of the things that has worked for me is called brain dump. So dumping your brain. So basically whatever you are internalizing, you externalize it, because when you say it out loud or into a paper to yourself, you start to be like, well, I was not expecting that. Because sometimes they sound so loud in your head that you can't even process them. And then once you put it into a paper or you say it out loud, you come to the realization that you're saying really awful things to yourself, especially if it's not associated to like a depression or something worse. Of course, if it's something like really, really dark, it may actually make you spiral more. So be aware that this only works if you're someone that you're an overthinker that hasn't reached like what I call the point of no return, which is when you need medical help. Another thing is also pattern interruptions. Anything that you can interrupt with is great. What I mean by pattern interruptions, for example, for me, when I start to ruminate and I start to really go down that route and it's not problem solving anymore and it's just overthinking, the way that I go about it is almost snapping my brain and be like, why? I just ask, why? Why are you thinking this? Why is this going on? And when I mean why, I mean literally asking myself out loud, why? I'm going to give you guys an example so that you have a visualization of what this might be looking like. So for example, I had a presentation the other day, and that presentation, in my opinion, went really bad. The teacher basically spent a bunch of time asking us questions. I had the most horrible brain fog and I couldn't even think. So I found myself in a place where I was like, okay, so I'm not able to think. I'm having a hard time and I don't know what to do, right? I'm having the biggest blank of my life. I can't respond to the teacher right now. So I'm thinking, okay, so how am I going to turn this around? How am I going to deal with this? And first it started with problem solving of like, okay, what happened? What did wrong? What happened here? What happened next? But then I got into the point where I was analyzing me, and instead of going, okay, so it happened because you didn't train enough, or you didn't see the document enough, you didn't read enough. And that whole enough, it went into, okay, maybe you're not good enough. Maybe you're just, awful. Maybe you're bad. Maybe you're this. And I started talking to myself negatively. So how do you pattern disrupt when you start to go negative? So it goes from problem solving to rumination. The way that I went about it is, why are you talking to yourself that way? You had a bad day. You had brain fog. You weren't feeling good. It was raining. It was cold. I was nervous. We were the first ones to present. The internet was not working. You weren't feeling good. You weren't feeling well. You didn't remember stuff. It's fine to not remember stuff. Sometimes people forget stuff. It's fine for you to not remember this one part that is highly specific that your teacher wanted you to understand that even your colleagues had a hard time figuring out. It's fine. And you basically pattern disrupt it. But sometimes that doesn't work. And sometimes you need what I like to call a decision-making framework. So what I mean is, once you do get into that point, you need to make a decision. Because rumination, you're still thinking. You're actively thinking. This is not subconscious thinking. This is active thinking. you're constantly thinking about that. So you can make what I like to call decision-making framework, which is you stop yourself and you're like, okay, is this good for me or should I stop right here? And it's not easy because your negative thoughts are stronger than your positive thoughts, because we talked about this in a couple previous episodes, that your brain will give preference to negativity because it's easier to prove a point negative than prove a positive point. So what can we do? What I do is that I'm like, okay, so I have been thinking about this thing for way too long. What should I do that works for me to stop this? I can either distract myself. I can stop thinking about it, as in like being like, okay, so this is not going to have a resolution, so we're going to stop here. Or if this might have come from a problem solving, I may be like, okay, so I have been thinking about this too hard. What is the end goal in here? What is the last thing that I need to figure out? And then actually make a decision and move on. Now, this only works and applies for people that are fine. And when I mean fine, I mean quote fine. We're talking about people that don't have depression, that don't have anxiety, that don't have a medical issue. Because if you do, none of these will work. If you are stuck in a cycle of rumination and there's nothing that you can do or nothing that anyone can do for you, then you most likely need medical support. And if you do, get it. You are not weaker or stronger or XYZ, better or worse than anyone else by getting medical help. I had to get medical help. My anxiety was so bad that I had to get medical help. I needed help. I took medication because I needed help. And there's nothing wrong with that. I am the first person right here to say I have tools that have worked for me, but I also know when it does not work. And if you find yourself in a position where all the tools that I give to you do not work, then get help. I'm going to leave a couple links down there for anyone that wants to read on some stuff or get some sort of support. But the ultimate thing is, if you find that the average typical thing that people can try does not work, you need to seek medical help. And that's where I'll end this episode. I'm sorry if it's a sadder note, but the reality is that some topics sometimes have to end this way. Regardless of anything, if you like my videos or you want to get some sort of support, like, comment, and subscribe for more videos. And I hope to see you here next week. Have a lovely day. Bye-bye.